Yes, no, maybe. Sounds too confident. Those of you that say yes, what do you think the error is? Trinity?
You're supposed to have the two opposite interior angles, not the opposite interior angles with the angle one.
Good, good, okay. If angle 1 were here, would they be correct? Yes. Okay, so remember, this is your exterior angle theorem. So if the triangle was in the inside, then I would say angle 1 plus those two angles would get me equal to 180. But this angle's on the outside. Okay? So that's where you got to use your exterior angle theorem. And Trinity worded it exactly as I want to hear it. You take your two opposite interior angles, if you add them together, you get your exterior. So that's how you can correct this. So for your explanation of why they're wrong, just say something like, they didn't use the theorem correctly, they did the calculation for the angle inside the triangle, something along those lines. So what does that make the measure of angle 1 then? 130. So that is the work that you need to show to correct it. Okay, so you need a picture, you need to explain why they're wrong, and you need the correct answer with the work. Okay? Once you've got all that, go ahead and submit your bell ringers. Please submit them to Schoology if you can. If you cannot, please put your name on them and drop them in here. I'll give you a couple minutes to get back. And then once you're all finished, how about this? Alright, so today we start talking about something called triangle congruence. And it's what really the majority of this unit is going to be focused around, okay? But first we need to talk about something that's a mouthful, and I just abbreviated as CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Obviously a mouthful, so I just say CPCTC. And what that means is if I have two triangles that are congruent to each other, then their corresponding sides and angles are congruent to each other. Okay? So let's go over what that means. Let's start off with our angles. So this first triangle will have angle 1. What angle in the second triangle is angle A congruent to? D. How do you know that? What's specifically telling you that it's the same one then? There you go. Okay, that one arc. Okay, so that one arc right here is saying that those two angles are congruent to each other. So angle A and angle D are congruent to each other. Okay. What angle is congruent to angle B? So look at angle B, it has two arcs. Which angle on the second triangle has two arcs? E. And then which angle is congruent to angle C? It has the three arcs. F. Okay, so all of those angles are congruent to each other. Now let's talk about the sides. Okay, with the sides you have to be a little more careful. Okay, so I'm going to name this first side, side AB. Notice how I named it, okay? So I started off with A, so side AB has the 1 tick mark. And I started off with A, that has the 1 arc as the marking, and ended with B, that has the 2 arcs as the marking. So I need to follow that same approach to name the side that's congruent to AB, which would be what? DE, very good. Okay, so DE has the 1 tick mark, so I know it's that side. I started off with the 1 angle marking, so I need to start off with the 1 angle marking over there. So DE, good. Okay, what does that mean is going to be congruent to side BC? EF, good. And then side AC. DF, good. So for the last one, AC is the 3 tick mark, so I need the 3 tick marks over here. I started off with A, which means I need to start off with D on the other side. Okay, so if I want to say these 2 triangles are congruent to each other, I can say triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. And sometimes you may be given a problem where your triangles are blank, and all you're given is this statement right here, angle or triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF, and you still need to figure out the pieces. But I can do that, okay? Notice that angle A, or the letter A is in the first position, the first letter, angle D is in the first letter. So A and D are going to be congruent. B is the second letter, E is the second letter, B and E are congruent. Yes, Greg?
Is that top right, DE or DF?
That is DE. Sorry about that. That is DE. Okay, you can do the exact same thing with the sides. AB is the first 2 letters. That means it's going to be congruent to the first 2 letters in the second triangle, DE. AC is the first and third. It's going to be congruent to DF, the first and third in the other. Okay, you can go both ways with it. Alright. There are 5 triangle congruence theorems that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about 2 of them today. We'll talk about the other 3 on Monday. Okay? The first one is called side angle side, or SAS. Okay? So if I have 2 sides and the included angle, okay, the included angle, write this down, the included angle is the angle between the 2 sides. The included angle is the angle between the 2 sides. Say it one more time. The included angle is the angle between the 2 sides. So for side angle side, if I have 2 sides of the included angle of one triangle, and that's congruent to 2 sides of the included angle of another triangle, then I can say those 2 triangles are congruent by side angle side. Okay, so let's do what we did in the last one to name our pieces. Let's start off with our side. Okay, side ST is congruent to what side? Be careful with your naming. Side ST is congruent to? YZ, good. Okay, I started off with the angle. I gotta start off with the angle on the other, so YZ, good. Okay, the angle's really easy for this one. What angle is congruent to angle S? Y. It's the only angle even marked. And then side RS is congruent to?
What? What side did you say?
RS. There you go, XY. Okay, I didn't start off with the angle, so I got to start off with the non-angle here. So that would be XY. Okay, so now I can say that triangle RST is congruent to triangle XYZ. By side angle side. Alright, notice that when I've been naming these triangles, it's been in alphabetical order. It does not have to be, okay? I could have said that this was triangle STR, but I would have had to name this one YZX, because the corresponding parts have to be in the same position in that name. Okay, so you just have to be consistent. Whenever you name one of them, you gotta name the other the exact same. angle A. Alright, the last congruence theorem is side, side, side. And that one, to me, is the easiest. It's the most obvious. So if I have three sides of one triangle, and they're congruent to three sides of another triangle, then the triangles are congruent by side, side, side. Okay? So which side is congruent to AB? DE. Okay, so DE, notice I started off with A, which is between the first and the third tick mark. I need to start off between the first and the third tick mark here, so that's DE. Which one is congruent to BC? E. Yes. Sure. Not FE. There you go, EF. Because B is between the first and the second tick mark, so I need to start off with the first and the second tick mark there. And then AC is congruent to? There you go, DF. So once again, I can say that triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF by side, 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 or SSS. Alright. For these first few problems, we're just going to practice figuring out the corresponding parts. So figuring out what sides are congruent to each other, what angles are congruent to each other. But this time, all I'm given is just the name. Okay, so I got to figure out, based on the name, which angles are going to be congruent to each other. Alright, let's start off with the angles. I think the angles are a little easier for this problem. Based off the name, which angle is congruent to angle A? X, okay? A is listed first. Needs to be the next one listed first, which is X. Okay, so on your picture, have one arc at A and X. Alright, I'm going to have to keep erasing because, as you can see, my pictures are not that big. And this is going to turn into a mess. So for A and X, have one arc to say they're congruent. Alright, which angle is congruent to angle B? Y, the middle letter. So have two arcs for that one. And the reason you have two arcs instead of one is because you're saying B and Y are congruent to each other, but they're not congruent to X and Z. Okay? And then that only leaves two more angles. Which angle is congruent to angle C? Z. And for that one, have three arcs to say that those two angles are congruent to each other. Okay. Now let's talk about our sides. Alright, which side, based on the name, is congruent to AB? XY, good. First two letters, XY. So AB and XY are congruent to each other, so give that one tick mark. Which side is congruent to BC? Y and Z. Give those two tick marks. And then which side is congruent to AC? Good, XC. First and third letters. So for that side, or sides, give that three tick marks. Alright, this next one's a little more tricky, but I think for this next one, starting off with the sides is the easier thing to do. Alright, so, which side is congruent to BC? DE. Okay, BC is the first two letters, DE is the first two letters. So BC and DE are congruent to each other. What's congruent to CD? EB. Last two letters. And then what is BD congruent to? DB. But what do you notice about BD and DB? On the picture. It's the same line. Yeah, it's the same line. Okay, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but that comes up a lot in this unit, is something being congruent to itself because it's the exact same thing. Alright, now let's talk about the angles. Alright, the angles are a little more tricky with this one. Let's start off easy then. Which angle is congruent to angle C? E, there we go, E. Okay, those are congruent to each other. Alright, now here's where things get a little tricky. Okay, I cannot say that B and D are congruent to each other because this line right here is messing things up. Okay, angle B is this entire thing. But because of this line right here, that's messing with things a little bit. So I have to be a little more careful here. Okay, so we need to split this up sort of. This angle right here, how would I name it with three letters? CDB, good. Okay, D must be in the middle. B and C can go wherever else, but since point D is my vertex, that's got to be in the middle. So that is CDB. Okay, using my letters over here, I need to figure out which angle is going to be congruent to it. Okay, so let's work slowly. C in this triangle is labeled what letter? 1, 2, or 3?
2.
2. Which one is second here?
E.
E. Okay, D for the first triangle is listed what? Third. Which one's listed third here? B. And then B is listed first. Which one's listed first here? D. So that angle, so this is the angle we were just working with, CDB. That is congruent to this one right there, EDB. So you've got to use the letters to help you out. Okay. And then for this last one, let's work with this angle right here. Tell me this angle. CBD or DBC, either or. So CBD. Okay. Look at your name again. C is listed what letter? Which one's second here? E. Okay. Someone other than Bailey for just a second. For this first triangle, what is B listed as? B is in boy. First, which one's listed first here? D. And then D is listed last. Which one's listed last here? B. So EDB is right there. So those are going to have 3 sectors, or 3 arcs. All right. Questions on those? All right. For these next 4 problems, we are asked to label the triangles as congruent by either side, 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 angle, side, or neither. Okay? So for this first one, side, 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 angle, side, or neither? Side, side, side. Good, yeah. SSS. Okay? Notice that each side is congruent to another side on each triangle. So that's congruent by side, side, side. Alright? Number 4. Side, 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 angle, side, or neither? Okay, side, 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 angle, side, or neither? Nope. Where does the angle have to be for side, angle, side?
Inside.
Where does the angle have to be for side, angle, side to work? It has to be in between the two sides. Okay, so if it were side, angle, side, my angles would be here. The angle must be in between the two sides.
It was neither.
So it's neither, yes. This one is neither. The angle has got to be in between the two sides. So I do have a side, an angle, and a side. But that angle, since it's not in between, I can't say it's side, angle, side. Okay? What does that make number 5 then? That's side, angle, side. Okay? That's side, angle, side. The angle is in between. Alright, what about number 6?
Neither.
Tell me why neither. So a little water?
That one, only got 1, 6, the other one got 2.
Okay, so, yes. Okay? What this is saying, the 2 tick marks are saying that these two sides are congruent to each other. This is saying these two sides are congruent to each other. It's not telling me anything about both the triangles. So I would need like a tick mark, and then 2 tick marks. I would need that on both sides. Okay, so because I don't have that, and because all of this is saying is that these two sides are congruent and those two sides are congruent, but nothing about the 2 triangles together, this would be neither. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Maybe. So it's just telling me that those 2 sides of each triangle are congruent. It's not telling me anything about the triangles being congruent to each other. Okay? Alright, for this next one, it printed a little weird on your paper. The one to the left is number 7 and the one to the right is number 8. I apologize about that. Alright, so for these 2 problems, whenever you're asked what additional information is needed, you only need one thing. Okay? If it looks like you need more than one of them is quote-unquote obvious that you should realize. It's going to take a little bit of time and practice for you to realize that. But anytime you have what additional information is needed, blah, 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 whether it's on a test or the study guide, whatever, you only need one thing. And if it looks like you're missing more than one of them is obvious, which you'll come with practice to see it, that eventually it will be obvious. Alright, so for number 7, I want to show that these triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. So I need to figure out that missing piece that would help me. Okay, so I've got a side, I've got an angle, I'm missing another side, right? Which 2 sides are going to help me see that these 2 triangles are congruent by side, angle, side? Be careful without your... Yeah, so you're right, just worded it the wrong way. Okay, so AC and DF. I think, did you say FD? Yeah, DF. Because if you start with this angle, then you got to start with the angle over here. But yes, okay, because I need the angle to be in between the sides. So that's why I can't choose BC or EF, because that angle is not in between. So I would need AC and DF to be congruent in order for this to be side, angle, side. That angle's got to be in between the sides. Alright, number 8. I want these triangles to be congruent by side, side, side. And this is what I was just mentioning. It looks like 2 pieces are missing. But one of them is supposed to be quote-unquote obvious, and one of them is not so obvious, and that not obvious one is your answer. So which sides do I need to be congruent to each other?
QY and QR.
There you go, QY and QR. Okay, why not QS?
Because it's the same line.
Okay, yes. So it's the same line for both. So kind of like number 2, where we had BD and DB. Okay, that's congruent to itself. So that's your quote-unquote obvious. QS is congruent to itself because it's the same line for both triangles. So that's your obvious. So your answer would be QR and QY. That's your not so obvious. And the not so obvious one is always your answer. And like I said, with time, you'll start being able to recognize this. So if you didn't recognize it immediately, no big deal. Alright, are there any questions on the front before we flip to the back? Alright. Moving on to the back. Okay. For this back page, you have got to pay attention. Okay? I am not trying to scare you, but if you do not pay attention, you will be lost. Okay? This next page, what you've probably noticed throughout this lesson so far, we haven't really done any number math. Okay? And this back page doesn't require a whole lot of it either. What we're about to do is something called proving. Okay? And when you prove something, you have to explain your answer. So you got to do a little bit of writing. Okay? We're not writing paragraphs here, but a good bit of writing. Okay? What I'm trying to do is show these triangles are congruent by whatever theorem, and I'm writing out each step to get me there, and then I also have to explain myself. I have to say, if these two angles are congruent, how are they congruent? If these two sides are congruent, why are they congruent? Okay, so it's a lot of writing. So that's my recommendation to you, is to have your phone away. I know this is not fun. It's pretty boring, to be honest. Okay? I'll be the first to admit that. But just stick with me. Okay? If you have questions, you need to ask. If I'm going too fast, you need to ask me to slow down. That makes sense. Okay. But please try your best to stick with me. I promise it's not that bad once we get started. But I'm just telling you, if you don't pay attention, you're going to be lost. Okay? So let's do this. Alright, so for number 1, I am asked to prove that this triangle is either congruent by side, 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 or side, angle, side. And I am given that point P is the midpoint of lines JK and LM. We'll talk about what that means in a second. The very first step in a proof is to write out what you were given. Okay, so we're just going to take that statement right there and write it again. Okay, so, and I'm just going to abbreviate it. P is the midpoint of JK and LM. And then you're going to draw an arrow, and on that right side of the arrow, you're going to write, how do I know that? Well, how do I know that point P is the midpoint? I was told that. I was given that. So my reason is just given. So the very first step of a proof is always write down your givens. If you can't do anything else with a proof, you can at least write down your givens. That's what I'll say. If you can't do anything, you can at least write that statement out again. Alright, now let's keep going. Now let's talk about what that means. Okay? So this is saying, let's break it down step by step. Point P is the midpoint of JK. How's that going to help me? Point P is the midpoint of JK. What does a midpoint do? Okay. So what's it doing to the two parts?
Making them one.
It's separating them. Which means, what do I know about the two parts? They're congruent. They're equal. Okay. If I have a midpoint, which is my halfway point, the two halves of the line must be the same, right? Because I'm at the halfway point. Okay. So what that's saying is, if my two halves are equal, JP and KP have to be equal, because P is the halfway point in that line. Okay, so now let's write that out. Segment JP is congruent to segment KP, and my reason, we'll just say definition of midpoint. By the definition of midpoint, these segments are going to be equal to each other. The definition of midpoint. Okay, so I've got a side. Good start. Let's keep going. Let's read that given statement again. Point P is the midpoint of JK. We talked about that. Point P is also the midpoint of LN. So what's happening to LN? It's also being cut in half. Okay? So that means NP and LP have to be congruent to each other because P is the midpoint of that line. Alright? So NP and LP are congruent to each other, once again, by the definition of midpoint. Alright? So I've got two sides. Now starts the question of, is it going to be side, 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 or side, angle, side? And I need to figure that out. Okay? So let me ask you this. If it were side, 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 then JM and LK would be congruent to each other, right? Is there anything in this problem telling me that they're going to be congruent to each other? Anything that can help me? Is there anything that is helping me in this problem to tell me that JM and LK are going to be congruent to each other? Yes or no?
No.
I don't think so. Okay? There's nothing in this problem. That given statement's not helping me. Okay? It helped me figure out those two sides, but that doesn't tell me anything about JM and LK. Or whatever it is. Yeah, JM and LK. So, sounds like to me side, 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 probably not a good bet. Which means it needs to be side, angle, side. So I need to figure out an angle that's congruent to another angle. Any ideas? Think about things we've talked about before, too. There you go. Okay. P is vertical. I've got intersecting lines, opposite angles. Okay. So I can say that angle JPM is congruent. How would I name the other angle if I named the first one JPM? LPK. So JPM and LPK are congruent because they're vertical. Okay? Intersecting lines, opposite angles. So they're vertical. Good. So let me ask you this. Do I have two sides that I've talked about in my proof? Yes? Do I have an angle? Yes? So I can finally end this thing and say that triangle JPM is congruent to triangle LPK by side, angle, side. And to end your proof, simply just have a box and you can either put an X in there or you can color it in. Whatever works for you. And that box is just saying, I've said what I've said. I've got nothing else to say. My proof is complete. Any questions on what we just did? I know it's a little overwhelming. It's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to figure out the pieces. It's a little tricky business, yes. It's a little tricky. But I think with some practice, y'all will be able to handle it. Any questions at all about what we just did? Alright, so let's move on to number 2. What is the very first step of a proof? State your givens. Okay, so I need to say H is the midpoint of GJ. And how do I know that? Well, I was given that. Alright, before we move on, I want to give you a quick definition. I simply just wrote it at the top of the back page. You can write it wherever you want, I don't care. But it's something called the reflexive with an X, not a C, not reflective, reflexive property. And you'll see why I'm giving you this in just a second. Yes.
Do we have a lot of writing in the spot, or can we do it down here? Where we can do it?
You could probably do this bottom right corner. I got room there. Okay, so reflexive property, which is a line segment, angle, or shape that is congruent to itself. So a line segment, angle, or shape that is congruent to itself. That is what the reflexive property says. A line segment, angle, or shape that is congruent to itself. Alright, let's keep going in this proof. Do I need to go back? Okay. Alright. Let's keep going now. So H is the midpoint of GJ. How's that going to help me?
It's into G and J.
Be careful with your wording.
It's
Splitting what? Say what you said though. It's splitting what? What line? Tell me the names. H is splitting what line in half? Someone help her. GJ. Okay, H is splitting GJ in half. So what does that mean about GH and JH? They're congruent. Okay. Alright, so I can say that GH and JH are congruent by definition of midpoint. Alright, once again, here comes the ultimate question. Is it side, 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 or side, angle, side? So let me ask you this. Before y'all answer, let me ask you this. Is there anything in this problem that's telling me anything about an angle?
Yes.
Tell me what, Brady.
GH is equal to JH.
Okay, that's a segment. An angle. Anything at all. Alright, let me ask you this, because this got brought up in second one. Does this look like it could maybe be a right angle? Maybe?
yes.
Okay.
A square.
Correct. You would have a square. Okay, you would have that little marking saying that it was a right angle. Okay? So you cannot assume that it's a right angle unless you're told that it's a right angle. Okay? So don't assume anything you were not told. Okay, so now let me re-ask the question. Is there anything in this problem that tells me anything about an angle that can help me? Yes? No? Maybe? I don't think so. So this must be side, side, side. Alright, so I've got two sides. What's my third side? The middle. Okay? HI is congruent to what? IH or HI, either or. And your reason is that definition I just gave you. Reflexive property. That line, HI, is congruent to itself. Because if you take these triangles and break them apart, HI is part of both of them. So that triangle is congruent, or that segment is congruent to itself by the reflexive property. So anytime you see something that's congruent to itself, reflexive property is your answer. Reflexive property comes up a lot. Alright? So have I listed out a reason for each side? Yes? Okay, got 3 sides. So I can say, oh wait, no we didn't. I'm sorry. No we didn't. We missed one. INJ and ING. Okay, I was given that. Okay, so sometimes you are given something but it doesn't specifically state it in your given. I was given that those have tick marks. Okay, so IG and IJ are congruent because I was given that. Okay, sometimes you notice stuff later, so if it's out of order, like your given not, like for example, our given for this one is down here, that's okay, just as long as you have it somewhere. Alright, now, have I listed everything, all 3 sides?
Yes.
Yes. So I can say, if I name this first triangle GHI, how do I name the second one? Yeah, GHI. So I started with G. So I went GHI. I gotta follow this in here. JHI. Okay, so GHI is congruent to JHI. Line, side, 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 and above. Alright. Any questions so far? Like I said, I know this is a little overwhelming, but if you're confused about anything, I gotta know. But like I said, it's like a puzzle, figuring out all the pieces. Alright. This next one's actually pretty easy. Not doing a whole lot of writing here, so yay. But I need to show that these 2 triangles are congruent, and I'm given that y equals 7. Okay, so for this triangle to the right, let's just plug in 7 for y in all my pieces. So for KL, what's 7 plus 6? 13. For my angle L, 5 times 7 is?
35.
35 plus 5?
40.
40. And then for side JL, 4 times 7 minus 1? 27. Okay, so notice that that matches my other triangle. Now I just need to list out my pieces. Okay, so which side is congruent to GF? KL, good. Which angle is congruent to angle F? L. And which side is congruent to HF? JL. Side, angle, side. So I don't even have to put a reason here because I can just see numerically that they're equal. So I can say that HGF is congruent to JKL by side, angle, side. Not too bad. Alright, we got 2 more problems. Let's get them done. Alright, number 4. Okay, let's break this down. I am given that RT is a perpendicular bisector. And we haven't really talked about that, but we talked about perpendicular, and we talked about bisectors. We talked about bisectors like day 1 of geometry. What does perpendicular mean? They intersect at what type of angle? Right angle. Okay, so they intersect at a 90-degree angle. Right? Anyone happen to remember what bisect means? Very good. You're the only one that's got it. Cut in half. Okay, write that down if you don't remember that. Bisect, cut in half. Bisect means cut in half. Alright, so what this is saying is RT is a perpendicular bisector. It intersects line SW at a 90-degree angle, and it's cutting it in half. Okay? So, remind me, the first step in a proof is? State your givens. State your givens. Okay, so I was given that RT is the perpendicular. Remember perpendicular, the symbol for it is an upside down T. We talked about that real briefly. So upside down T, perpendicular. So RT is a perpendicular bisector, and I was given that. Alright, so I need to show that these triangles are congruent, and then I need to find side ST, but we'll figure that out in a minute. Alright, so RT is a perpendicular bisector. So it's intersecting SW at a 90-degree angle, and it's cutting it in half. How's that going to help me? RT is intersecting SW at a 90-degree angle, and it's cutting SW in half. Name this up. Very good, okay? So T is kind of like a midpoint, okay? It's just part of the perpendicular bisector. T is cutting this segment in half, or RT is cutting this segment in half. So because it's getting cut in half, ST and WT have to be congruent, just like a midpoint. Okay? So ST is congruent to WT, and instead of saying definition of a midpoint, we'll just say definition of a bisector, because we weren't told that this was specifically a midpoint. We were told it was a bisector. So definition of bisector. Very good. Alright, what else do I know? Got a side. Sorry?
How do you know which angle, like, to say first?
What do you mean?
Like, if I were, or, wait.
Your vertex, where the angle opens, that letter must be in the middle.
So, like,
I know where you're going. Keep talking.
okay,
Yeah, keep talking. I know where you're going.
like,
I don't think you're wrong.
okay, so I said a line segment. Like, our,
Say what you think. Say what you think.
like, our,
Okay. I think you were going somewhere there. Timothy?
Wouldn't it make WRT and SRT congruent angles?
Be careful your wording. Because you're saying these two angles.
That's what I thought.
Um,
Split it in half, and then if it's bisecting it.
it's not an angle bisector though. The perpendicular bisector is just cutting the line in half. If I were told it was an angle bisector, then yes, you would be correct. But I wasn't specifically told that. So that's one of those things. You can't assume since it's a perpendicular, because perpendicular bisector, we haven't talked about this. A perpendicular bisector is only cutting the line in half. I would have had to been told this is an angle bisector too, meaning it's cutting that angle in half. Okay, but I like that thought. Can anyone tell me what this angle right here is? How do you know that? Okay, keep going. Why is it 180? Because this is a line, right? Okay, so if this is 90, and this is a straight line, that also has to be 90, right? Is that where you're going, Rory? I knew you were. I knew you were.
I just thought it was wrong.
Nope, you're right. Okay, this is a straight line. Okay, so if I name these angles, angle WTR is congruent to angle STR, and we can just say supplementary because it's a line. So I can say those are supplementary. So I've got a side and an angle. That means I need another side.
Would your angle bisector be counted as a line?
Your perpendicular bisector?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes. Okay, it's still part of the triangle, yes. You need three sides for a triangle, right? So if that's not there, then you've only got... Because remember, we're splitting, we're talking about these two triangles. So, yes. Okay? Tell me then.
It would be congruent
Two.
itself.
There you go. Okay, RT, if I take these triangles and split them apart, RT is the same segment, right? It exists with both triangles. Good. So I can say that RT is congruent to itself by what? What do you say when something's congruent to itself? Reflexive property. So okay, talked about a side, an angle, and a side. Yep. So I can say the triangle WTR is congruent to triangle STR by side, angle, side. Alright. So those two triangles are congruent by side, angle, side. There was one more thing this problem asked me to do. What else did it ask me to do besides prove the triangles are congruent? Find ST. Okay, so I'm looking for a number. Okay. How do ST and WT relate? They're congruent, which means I need to do what? They equal each other. Okay, remember congruent means equal. Okay, so ST and WT are going to be equal to each other. So, what is it? So 4x minus 1 equals 3x plus 2. Find x. Alright, what should I do first? Anyway.
Subtract 3.
Subtract 3x. Okay, we can do that. Subtract 3x. So that gets me 1x, or just x, minus 1 equals 2. And then what? Add 1. So x is what?
3.
X is 3. Okay, so now if I go plug that into ST, ST was 3x plus 2. So 3 times 3 plus 2. What's the measure of ST?
11.
11. 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11. Alright, we've got one more problem left. Y'all stick with me. Alright, I know this is boring. I know it's not fun. But please ask questions if you're not understanding, okay? Otherwise, I don't know what you're understanding and what you're not. Alright, let's do this last problem. Alright, I am given that GH and GB are congruent. So one thing you also want to do is, when you're reading your given statements, go ahead and label it in your picture. Alright, so GH and GB are congruent to each other. I'm also given angle HGF and angle BGF are congruent to each other. And I'm asked to prove that angle H is congruent to angle B. Okay? We'll talk about what that means in a minute, but we can't do that until we've shown that the triangles are congruent. Okay? What's the very first step in a proof? State the givens. State the givens. Okay? My givens, GH is congruent to GB. And angle HGF is congruent to BGF. Alright, so I've got a side and an angle. That means I need another side. GF is congruent to GF. Do what, Bailey? Yes, because it's reflexive, right? So remember that your angle's got to be in between the sides. Okay, so that's why I can't say that HF and BF are congruent, because that angle is no longer in between. So GF is congruent to itself. And what do you say when it's congruent to itself? Reflexive property. So, I've listed a side, an angle, and a side, right? So, I can say that triangle HGF is congruent to BGF by side, angle, side. But the question asked me to prove that angles H and F were congruent. Okay. Flip back to the front for me and look at the CPCTC we talked about. It says, if two triangles are congruent, then each pair of corresponding sides and angles are congruent. Okay? These two triangles we just said they were congruent, right? And are H and B in corresponding spots? Are they both labeled first? Yes. Okay? So they're corresponding angles, which means I can simply just say that H is congruent to B by CPCTC. And now I'm done with my proof. Because I answered what I was looking for. Once you've shown that the triangles are congruent, you can say that all the parts are congruent to each other by CPCTC. So if you ever have a problem like that where it says prove, it doesn't say prove that the triangles are congruent, it's saying show that an angle or a side is congruent, you've got to say that CPCTC at the end. Okay? Otherwise you haven't fully answered the question. Alright? I know that was a lot. I appreciate you sticking with me. Are there any questions? Alright, your homework is on paper, which means it's due Monday. Okay? It is 8 problems, 3 proofs, and 5 others. Okay, have out your notes, because whatever's in the notes is going to help you. And you've got about 25 minutes. You can get this done. Okay, work with others, please. That's what they're there for. If you have questions, I just want you to go ahead and start this now. So for 1, if you finish it on homework this weekend. And then for 2, you can ask me questions while I'm here. Okay, because I know this stuff can be a little overwhelming. Okay, so please go ahead and start it. Feel free to work with others. I don't care. But please, please, please go ahead and at least start it. And remember, since it's due Monday, you got to have it done. Okay, this is not waiting until test. We do have to go over this. So use your notes. And they...